The Tampa Bay Birth Network is an organization of families, professionals, and individuals who support pregnancy, birth, and parenting as normal and natural processes. Our events provide information and resources to help empower expectant couples. The Tampa Bay Birth Network is a Florida non-for-profit organization and federal 501c3 made up of professionals and individuals who support the natural processes of pregnancy, birth, and parenting. This year's Natural Birth and Baby Expo was hosted by Corbett Preparatory School of IDS in Tampa, Florida. To find out more, please visit www.tampabaybirthnetwork.org.
A little shorter. I'm Christina Bennett. I'm a part of the Tampa Bay Birth Network. I've seen a couple faces here in earlier lectures. I get the pleasure of introducing Miss Hilary Flower here. She's the author of Adventures in Tandem Nursing, Breastfeeding During Pregnancy and Beyond, which is published by La Leche League International. She teaches environmental studies at Eckerd College and lives in St. Petersburg with her 3 children, one of which is here today. Her original tandem nursling is now almost 16. She's grateful to be surrounded today by all of these new babies and young families as she finds nothing more inspiring and beautiful in life. So please give a warm welcome to Miss Hilary Flower.
Hello. Yes, this is my the baby part of the tandem nursling duo. This is Dervin, he's 13. And I guess he's kind of a cautionary tale. I don't know. We'll see what you make of him as we go along. I asked him not to interrupt, so we'll see. Well, I'm really happy to be here. And I'm speaking to you as the author of Adventures in Tandem Nursing and also as a scientist. And I brought my scientist mind to the process of writing the book, as well as my personal experience and experience of a lot of mothers. So you'll be hearing from both of those sides as I try to dispel some myths. And the way that I have framed this talk is in terms of 5 tips for people who may be considering breastfeeding during pregnancy and possibly beyond. But it's a way of framing the topic in general. So if you are considering it, number 1, find moms who have been there. You don't want to go through it alone. And it's really good to get a whole range of different experiences because it's full of so many unexpected surprises and individual experiences that you really kind of want to get a range. And now, compared to when I wrote the book back in 2003, there's so many online resources. So if you live in a community where you can't find people locally, the internet is an incredible resource for online forums and stuff. But also, a good starting place locally is your La Leche League group. So talk to other moms. Secondly, you want to take stock of your self-care resources. And this is really not because tandem nursing is particularly taxing, but having a second child is taxing, whether you're breastfeeding the older nursling or not. So you want to be able to somehow prioritize self-care. You want to identify your resources for helping you rest, be it a partner or actually continuing to breastfeed the older child is a great way to be able to continue to spend some time on the couch. Because if you're running after a toddler, you are going to be exhausted. So although the assumption is that continuing to breastfeed and breastfeeding too after you have the baby is more energetic, I think that that doesn't take into account how much breastfeeding the older child is an energy saver and just a all-purpose tool. Getting the toddler down for a nap, soothing a boo-boo, comforting. And you want to have support. You want to have support for your choices whichever way you go. There are a lot of choices along the way and a lot of times when you need to make a pretty confusing choice among a lot of different options. And you need people that can help you learn what's best for you and not be trying to steer you one way or the other. And then nutrition. So one of the big things people worry about, and well-meaning friends, family, and physicians may be worried about, is nutrition, right? So can you eat for yourself, your baby, and your toddler? And it turns out, so as a scientist, I delved really into that. What's the double duty, issue with breastfeeding during pregnancy, and sometimes you see online, you still see this online, that your body gives first to the fetus and then to the mother and then to the nurse. Really, it's there's a lack of trust that's even endemic sort of in our own minds, within breastfeeding friendly circles, where there's this sense that, it's difficult to accommodate the demands of nursing. But we're built to nurse. And it doesn't even take a fancy diet. You don't have to be particularly attentive to make sure you get enough calcium. You have enough calcium within your system. If you dump in a lot of extra calcium supplements, you will, to put it sort of bluntly, you'll pee it out. So you don't need to do anything, and trying to do something extra won't help. Your body can make a baby and milk at the same time. So nothing fancy. You want to have enough food so that you're continuing to gain weight, but that's the case no matter what. And you want to drink to thirst. So sometimes I see advice like, "Oh yeah, you can totally, have a nursling and be pregnant, but you just have to drink 2 gallons a day." It's like, what? You don't need to. You can just drink to thirst. Which again is that idea of like trusting your body. We are born to have babies, frankly, and our bodies have evolved to be able to do that. So tip number 3 is to expect changes. So a lot of times the temptation to continue breastfeeding during pregnancy is to have the continuity of what you've had before. And although there are many, many, many benefits to continuing to breastfeed during pregnancy and beyond, continuity is generally not something you can count on. So you tend to get a reduction in milk supply. Again, within expecting the unexpected, don't be surprised if you continue to make abundant milk. That's not even a roadmap. You can't assume that you will have a drop in milk supply, but most women do. You tend to your body tends to undergo essentially a weaning mechanism. It can be triggered if you're not pregnant by the birthday of your nursling. There are a lot, going to preschool for the first time can trigger a weaning mechanism within the body. But pregnancy is one of the things that seems to trigger that. And reduction in nursing can trigger that. And your milk starts to change in composition. So you go into weaning milk. Weaning milk is a little more salty and a little less sweet, which has been speculated is sort of a way that your body's trying to kind of hasten the nursling off, making it seem like it's their idea, right? So your milk can drop in supply, become a little saltier, a little less sweet. That's common. It's not every time. Some babies are like, "Oh, mama, it tastes like strawberries," So you'll get a lot of different reviews depending on your nursling and how your milk changes. You tend to get colostrum in the 3rd trimester. So some moms who experience a drop in supply in mid-pregnancy and maybe the baby weans may start producing milk in the 3rd trimester. It may even be orange like colostrum. And a nursling who had weaned may unwean. My baby unweaned. I could not have been more surprised. I'd gone through all the mourning of like, oh, nursing is over. And then nursing was not over. So I had to rethink that whole thing. So all kinds of changes in the milk. Pain or agitation, which tends to be unexpected, and you want to just be aware that it's not because you're a horrible mother if it starts to come up. Sometimes the agitation presents itself as unwanted thoughts, like, get this child off of me, and it's like, what? Am I a terrible mother? I love my child, And so there's this kind of physiological weaning mechanism that can sometimes get into your own brain, and it's not you. It's some kind of physiological thing that not everyone experiences, but a lot of women can do. So I always like to put that out there because it's hard to talk about. And so if it happens to you, you may feel like it is about you or about your relationship with your child, and it's not. It's very common. Sometimes it's experienced as like a creepy crawly experience, like, oh my gosh, there's spiders on me. So there's all kinds of weird things that start to happen. Or not. Again, it could be that the unexpected experience for you is that none of these things happen. So there's really no rule. So as I had mentioned with unweaning, your older nursling when you're pregnant may start to wean, may unwean, may nurse more than ever. You may experience when you have your new baby that your nursling, your toddler, nurses more than the newborn. And that could be unexpected. So that definitely happened for me. In fact, my 2-year-old was, her way of adapting to the new change in the family was to become the newborn. So I had to hold her head up because she couldn't hold her own head up. So I had 2 newborns. The older one nursed more than the baby. So you could have all kinds of different unexpected changes. Some moms who decide that they choose tandem nursing may have the unexpected surprise that their toddler does not. That the toddler may wean during pregnancy when the mother wanted to continue, or the toddler may wean with the birth of a new baby. So you're not the only decision maker as the mother, and sometimes it's a rude surprise to find out that your child is going in a direction you had not intended. But that's part of rolling with it. And again, every woman and every pregnancy is unique. So you may have heard from your friend, she experienced one thing. You may experience something completely different. You may have done it once before, think you know what you're getting into, and have a completely different experience the second time around or the third time. So it's unpredictable even within one mom. Okay, so tip number 4 is to get a breastfeeding-friendly caregiver, be it a midwife or an obstetrician, someone who can understand the value of breastfeeding for the older child. Because without that, there's that much more of an impetus to admonish the mother, oh, well, you need to wean. Well, why would you continue nursing anyway, is sort of the unspoken assumption behind a lot of that urging the mother to wean. And a lot of times it gets expressed as research has shown that continued breastfeeding during pregnancy causes miscarriage, so you need to wean. And I still hear this, even though I've published on this, and I always tell moms that contact me with this story, ask them what the research is, because actually the research that has been done in recent years has found absolutely no danger associated with continued nursing. So I'll give you a little bit of that just because I find it so exciting. When I first wrote the book, there were a lot of indications that it was safe. Absolutely no research-based reason to believe that it wasn't safe. But I'm actually dying to do a second edition because now there is actual medical research saying that, for instance, a study in Iran, 80 women that were overlapping breastfeeding and pregnancy, and then 240 that were the control group that were not overlapping, and they compared the outcomes. They found no difference in the incidence of problems during pregnancy. Including infection, hypertension, bleeding. They were just as likely to have full-term babies. And so their conclusion was that it's a personal decision whether you continue to nurse. A study in Japan, and this is actually a photo from the study, it looked at 110 women who were overlapping and 774 who were not overlapping and compared their outcomes. And in this case, they did not select. In the Iran study, they selected only for healthy pregnancies and just kind of kept it simple in that regard. In this study, they didn't exclude women who were having preterm labor or having bleeding, and they wanted to look at the outcome just across the board. And they found statistically a smaller number of women had preterm labor and miscarriage that were overlapping, and there was really no statistical difference. So their conclusion was the issue of breastfeeding during pregnancy is a problem that needs to be overcome. Through misunderstanding and prejudice, innumerable infants have been deprived of their mother's milk. So there's a lot, part of what people don't understand, there's an understanding that nipple stimulation releases oxytocin. Oxytocin's associated with contractions and going into labor. So there's kind of a simplistic and understandable sort of 1 + 1 = 2. But when you look more carefully, there's less oxytocin produced when you're pregnant than at any other time in a woman's life. Your body's trying not to go into preterm labor. And your uterus is made insensitive to the oxytocin that is released. So there's fewer receptor sites. They're down-regulated, sort of like turning the volume down, and they're blocked by progesterone. Heard of it, right? So the most common hormone that's associated with pregnancy is right there protecting you from going into preterm labor just because you're nursing, which also makes sense because women are no longer told not to have sex during pregnancy, right? So by the same token, breastfeeding is also safe, and it's a myth. When I was writing my book, I talked to a miscarriage expert in London, and she was just flabbergasted to hear that physicians were telling their clients that they needed to wean, even if there's an indication that of bleeding or possible miscarriage, she still saw breastfeeding as completely irrelevant, and she's an expert on miscarriage. So anyway, it's my pet peeve, this idea that obstetricians are still telling women that there's a reason that they need to wean during pregnancy, because there isn't. Okay, so tip number 5 is to have really realistic expectations and to adjust as you go. So be prepared, even if you've made a decision, to have to reevaluate that decision or have to, take a new turn. That's kind of the nature of having a second child anyway. What the path you are on with your first child is going to be completely redefined. The whole family will become completely redefined by having another child. And that's kind of scary in that there's a lot of uncertainty, but that's what life is about, right? Is about like new adventures. So having a second child is an adventure in the family. And if breastfeeding is involved, it's a breastfeeding themed adventure. So it's not a magic bullet. So a lot of times, feeling attached to the firstborn, there may be a feeling of, if I tandem nurse, I will protect my child from feelings of jealousy. And although I have seen pictures where the tandem nurslings are holding hands and it's totally awesome and there's like rainbows and unicorns everywhere, it doesn't always happen that way. So it's not a magic bullet, but it's also not a nightmare. Nothing's going to happen in your tandem nursing relationship that wouldn't have happened in some other fashion if you weren't breastfeeding. It could take a breastfeeding form, or it could take a hanging on the curtains form, right? So there's just all kinds of different ways that an anxiety can express itself. So so I found this is a statue somewhere. I found it on the internet. I thought, okay, that's an interesting tandem nursing position. But you'll need to experiment with different positions. Some people find that, using the U-shaped nursing pillow, you can accommodate 2 nurslings, sometimes side lying. My book has a lot of different examples of positions. Some moms find that they don't need to wean, but they can't nurse them both together. There's all kinds of different solutions, and the solutions may change as the babies get older. You may find that you need to negotiate nursing boundaries in a way that you never had to with your toddler before. You may need to find a way of kind of keeping the toddler going while you're nursing the baby if you don't like to nurse them together. There's sometimes a new need for boundaries and negotiation, saying no and not feeling guilty, which only will get more strong as your child gets older anyway, saying no. I never had to say no to my firstborn until the secondborn came along, and there were breastfeeding forms of no and all kinds of other ones that sort of never went away. But it wasn't because I was breastfeeding, it was because the family had changed. So you can't really see in this picture. This is a painting that shows tandem nursing and like what seems like a whole horde of children waiting. One thing I didn't expect in terms of sibling rivalry was that when my baby was a little bit older, he would see his sibling nursing, and the grass is always greener, right? So he would like try to shove her face off of that breast, and he would switch over, and she was like, all right, fine. She would switch to the other breast, and then he'd be like, oh, wait, maybe that one's better, and he would shove her face off. So we had all kinds of interesting antics at the breast. But sibling rivalry either will or won't happen in your family, regardless of whether you're nursing. One piece of advice that I have heard that I think is actually pretty good is not to give up in the first 6 weeks. The first 6 weeks of any major life challenge is going to be tough, no matter what. And some women who have sort of struggled but got through those first 6 weeks are glad that they did. If it continues to be something you want to quit, then for sure quit and don't feel guilty. Because the bottom line of this talk that I would like to convey to all of you is to trust yourself. So that is the center of forward-moving mothering, right? And you may not have had to really get as strong with that focus with one, but when you have 2 or 3, then you have to learn that lesson of trusting yourself, because there will always be someone who thinks that you should have done something differently, or, there's always going to be someone who can second guess you in either direction. So fundamentally, it comes down to trusting your relationship with your child and making a decision that you can live with, that fits with your values, that fits with your feeling within your body, and that fits with your child's needs as you understand them at that moment. And so that's my whole talk. Those are my 5 tips for you. And I wanted to leave time so that if anyone wanted to ask questions or share experiences, or I wanted to sort of share the floor with all of you. Yeah?
You mentioned discomfort, pain, and agitation. My wife showed a lot of that. I mean, my son is fresh out of the womb. He was born March 5th of this year, and my daughter's going to be 3 in July.
Congratulations.
Yes, and she still nurses, and my wife showed plenty of the, could actually agitate her nipples or her areola area just to have the comfort.
Yeah.
For a minute.
Yeah.
For a minute, and then we'll get back to it. So there was a lot of that. Is there anything that you know about, like chemically and things like that, that actually does that, or is it just?
I think it's chemical. I do. I think it's chemical, and I think it's a weaning mechanism. That it doesn't mean that your body's necessarily right, but there are different things that can trigger it. And once it gets triggered, your body is trying to help you and help your child off. And it doesn't mean that it's necessarily for the best, but it's like a body thing. But yeah, it can feel like knives. It can really hurt. And there's something that some women have done is to shorten the nursing, right? So we're just going to do this for, one ABC song, or, we're going to count to 10. And, so sometimes a shortened nursing session, if you know that it has an end, you can get through it. Sometimes reducing the frequency can make it more manageable. But at the same time, if it really feels like she really would be happier not doing it, it's okay too if she doesn't want to continue. One of my big things is that no woman should feel like she's obligated, because she still loves her child and she doesn't have to prove it. And so it's really what's the most honest choice, what's her best way to move through it. But in my book, there's a whole, and actually kellymom.com has a lot of my pointers and stuff, but there's a lot of different ways that different moms that I was sort of pooling their stories when I was writing the book, that where they found ways to sort of distract themselves or shorten a nursing, or kind of make it more manageable so that they could either continue nursing, or if they were going to wean, so that they could wean more slowly instead of abrupt weaning. So yeah.
So if you have a newborn and you have say a 2 or 3-year-old, should you take the pregnancy, like if you want to end one and have the other, and you don't have 2 at the same time, say you don't want to have 2 at the same time, should you take the pregnancy to wean and then never let the older one taste the new milk, because then it might just explode into this feeding fetish that tastes better?
Right, and then like, so I think I would definitely not let the older nursling taste it unless you are willing for it to reopen. Because sometimes the older nursling tastes it, or they can't latch anymore. Sometimes they can latch and they taste it and they're like, you know what, I'm done. Like emotionally they realize they don't need to keep nursing. And sometimes it doesn't taste good, or, but sometimes it tastes like strawberry milk, and they're going to go for it. So you would definitely want to be aware that you are opening the door. Yeah, and actually I did go through tandem nursing with my first pair, and with my third pregnancy, I was like, you know what, I don't want to go there again. So I did wean my middle child. He was 3, and so I started to wean him when I was pregnant, letting the pregnancy be the thing that kind of like encouraged that along, saltier milk and stuff like that. And that worked for me.
Did you prefer the second way or the first way?
I think that my middle child was more prepared to wean. He didn't really want to. He said he wanted to push the wean away. I remember him saying. He wasn't like all for it, but he was more emotionally ready to than my firstborn. I think that she really benefited from continuing, and I think that's part of why it was worth it to me despite the challenges, and why it was, so it's very individual. Yeah.
I wanted to know I know you're not supposed to give infants honey, but is it okay for me to have honey while I'm breastfeeding, or in my third trimester? Mm-hmm. Along with the other stuff I'm not allowed to have now, like Swiss cheese and sushi and that stuff matter?
I think you should probably ask someone who knows more about the details of that, but I have personally not heard that you can't have honey when the mother can't have honey when she's pregnant. I haven't heard that.
I knew the infant, but I didn't know.
Right. I don't think it applies to you. So drink honey. Anyone else? Other comments? Questions? Comments? Yes?
I was hoping that I had my book, so I didn't realize that you were local. I was going to get your autograph, but I love your book.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I load it out all the time. So
oh, good.
It's really nice to hear you speak.
Well, thanks.
What's the name of the book?
It's Adventures in Tandem Nursing. But it's as much about pregnancy and nursing. I wanted to title it Adventures in Nursing During Pregnancy and Sometimes Beyond, so that people would know they could pick it up when they're pregnant. But that's too much of a mouthful, and so Adventures in Tandem Nursing. Any other thoughts? Anyone wants to share their experiences?
Well, I could share. I mean, I have 6 kids, and so like you said, they're all unique. So some weaned during pregnancy, some didn't, some quit for a while and then picked back up. Other ones wanted to try it, and then that was it. Mm-hmm. My personal experience has been, and with other moms I see, if you really make it a big deal about being like, no, 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 then they're more persistent about it. A lot of times if you know, it's hard because you don't know how they're going to take to it, but it becomes more of a focus if you say no. So one thing that a couple of friends I knew did say, they gave it in a cup. It's not quite the same, but and then that was it. They didn't ask anything.
Yeah.
From one personal experience, you were talking about how some children are emotionally ready. I know my daughter, for a long time that was the way her and my wife connected.
Yeah.
Especially after, my daughter's birth being cesarean, my wife's really pushing for natural birth. My wife clung to breastfeeding. My wife needed this as much as my daughter did.
Yeah.
And so with this one, though, it being, a natural, a V-back, H-back.
Wow.
My wife feels emotionally ready, but now the toddler is like, well, why? And that's a lot of And so your suggestions about a lot of time, it's kind of funny, because we kind of said that, maybe just a little bit for a nap, a little bit for nighttime, and we had this thing where, maybe she used to night nurse to help her go back to sleep if she maybe was in some discomfort. But now we just tried some soothing thing, and we just said, when the sun comes up.
Yeah.
Because the infant's right there. He's tucked in that booth pretty good.
Yeah.
So she can't necessarily climb in like she used to. So we have to say, when the sun comes up, Or your funny thing is, let's count to 10. My wife will get her to say just a sip.
Just a sip. There you go. Yeah, and that's very tender. And I think that she can trust in that relationship and know that the breastfeeding transitioned her into that solid relationship, but that the relationship is solid now, and that it can take new forms. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is the lazy latch. I'm sorry, because my 3-year-old now, because like you were saying, some they get older, their latches isn't as good. Have you found out with your children that irritation helps out? Say, please latch for
right.
And then do you know how that happens?
So part of it's that their mouth doesn't fit the same way, and part of it's that the mom is experiencing a contrast, and it's not a pleasant contrast. The teeth. All of a sudden, it's like the big. I remember when my toddler first nursed after I was used to nursing the newborn, and it felt like the big bad wolf, coming in. I'm like, what are those teeth doing? And she had seemed so tiny just, a few days before, but all of a sudden, now that I was used to the newborn. So part of it's the mom, experiencing an unpleasant contrast, and part of it's that the mouth is not as suited. Plus, the mom, the breast may get very much more engorged than the toddler was used to. And then that's a whole nother, latch skill. So, yeah, I think one of the things that some moms, I guess a minority of moms, have found helps is to go back to basics and, do the latch skills with the toddler. Open wide, wide mouth, and see if the latch can be improved. But yeah, it's one of the challenges. And I haven't heard a lot of stories where it's like, and then we got great at it and it was wonderful, but sometimes it can be improved. So.
Does your book have anything about how to wean?
Yeah, so there's a lot in there. About supporting that choice if that's the way the mom wants to go, because sometimes there's a lot of guilt. Like if it's been a breastfeeding relationship, it's like, so a lot around the feelings for the mom, but also techniques. And it wasn't, one of the really fun things about writing this book, it was very much La Leche League style, because I was getting on, it was 2002 when I was writing the book, and it was sort of when the internet was really taking off as a support network. And so I would mine quotes and then contact moms and ask if I could use their quotes. And so I was, picking up, 25 different moms and how they either reduced frequency or duration or actually began the process of weaning. And then in the back of the book, I forget how many stories, maybe 10, of moms' actual experiences. So you, instead of just the little soundbite quotes, you get stories of what it was really like, the texture of different moms' experiences, so that you could kind of place yourself within that. Okay, well, here's a mom that weaned, and here's how she got through it and how she felt about it, and here's a mom that didn't and tandem nursed 5. And one of the women triandem nursed, and here's what that was like for her. So you can kind of get a feel for the humanity of each person and see that you can be a human and have your own story as well. But yeah, so there's a lot of practical tips, and they were not just from my mind. It was the richness of lots of moms and lots of real life weaning experiences, for instance. Yeah. Yeah.
So I breastfed her until she was about 8 months. And really, there's 2 reasons why I stopped. Well, 3. The first was that I just didn't have a lot of support for breastfeeding to the first year.
Mm-hmm.
Mom had breastfed all 3 of my sisters and I. But it's different. You don't want to hear advice from your mom.
No.
But then the other thing was that I'd gone back to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to keep up with milk supply, but also on my boss's schedule.
Right.
And then she had teeth, and I didn't know enough to deal with the teeth and the biting, testing out their teeth.
Oh, yes.
That I just was, it freaked me out. I was like, one day I'm going to have a nipple. So, any advice for moms that are dealing with, a child with teeth, going back to work, all that stuff?
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest things that probably would have helped you is if you had more of a network of moms that were extended breastfeeding. Right. So number one, you wouldn't feel like such a freak, and it would be like, okay, well, all these other kids with teeth are doing it and hearing from the moms. But yeah, I'm trying to think, actually. I had some tandem nursing working moms in the book. One of the big things that they would all do is night wean, just to get through. But yeah, it's just that much more of a juggling act all around, isn't it? Yeah. And then your boss is another part of the decision-making matrix, even though they're not, they don't belong in the breastfeeding relationship. There they are. So, yeah.
I'm sorry if you've already mentioned this.
No.
I walked in late, but is it like, because I'm going to be working as well?
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to use a breast pump or whatever. But luckily, my hours are flexible. But
good.
Does a double breast pump, is there anything wrong with that, or is it efficient?
Go for it, man. Yeah, heck yeah. Yeah, much more efficient. Yep. Yeah, I used one of those too.
I have no idea. It's my first baby. I don't know what that's going to be like.
Right, and that's the whole thing about having a baby, right? Is like everything is unknown, and you don't know which things you really should buy and which ones you really won't need. I know that some breast pumps are a whole lot better than others, but I don't know what the latest ones that are recommended are. But yeah, for sure you're going to want to get recommendations.
I think insurance covers them now, so I'm just going to whatever.
Strange new world. Yeah.
The one is covered by insurance, which may not be the best, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and I saw too today that TSA has clarified their rules around breast milk going on airplanes. So, yeah, really, yeah, it's okay. Any other thoughts, questions, comments, anything? Well, I'm glad you guys are all here, and I look forward to sharing in the expo myself, so thanks for inviting me.